So I'm going to have you introduce yourself to the audience the way you want to be known.
My name's Ested Herndon. I am a host and editorial director at Vox.com and Vox Media. But for a long time, up until last week, I was a New York Times reporter and most recently wrote a cover story for the New York Times Magazine about Zohran Mamdani.
So, in the short time since we called you to talk about this, your title has changed because life comes at us
Life comes at you
fast.
fast.
Comes at us fast. But it is a good it's a good moment to talk to you
Mhm,
because in a way the conversation around Mamdani is a conversation, at least in the Democratic Party, between legacy ideas and
mhm.
ways of doing things and new, different, modern, more online ways of doing things,
Yeah.
which you are actually straddling as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually was interesting because the process of the reporting was happening at the same time I was kind of thinking about these things in my own life. And it was kind of a buildup from things and a change in media environment that we've seen over the last several years. I think Mamdani's really capitalized on that.
Big
Where
time.
he understands that legacy and traditional media are not often dictating the conversation anymore. And it was really explicit in the reporting. It becomes really clear that when he was calling people about getting in the race, he was doing so saying, I need a social media operation that's going to go further than money can get me. And so it was so conscious for him. And I think that is, to your point, it really speaks to a shift in media environment, shift in politics, and I think a shift in kind of the way people consume information now. And so, as part of this effort, I was thinking about like, if you're not on TikTok, if you're not kind of consuming vertically, if that's not how you consume info, we should stop thinking about that as like siloed. That's
Yeah.
where it lives now.
And it also means someone like you who, instead of being like, I have reached the mountaintop, like I am at the New
Yeah.
York Times writing the big piece about the big political player of the moment.
Yeah. It is funny. My mom reminded me that when I got the Times job, I was 25, and she asked me, like, what's, like, this is it, right? And I was like, oh, I'm never getting another job again. Like, I'm going to work here forever. And I think it really just speaks to, I think evolution and growth and all of those things. But also, I think how much has changed in 8 years, even just when we look at the media landscape.
So we're going to talk about a couple of things because the story of Zoran Mamdani, in a way, is the story, I think, of the last 2 years of post-election and post-Gaza war politics
Mhm.
in the US. They
Yeah.
kind of all get tangled up together, and I needed someone to help me untangle it.
Happy to do it.
Yeah, so let's just start with Mamdani himself because there's some relevant parts of his biography that come into play later.
Mhm.
One, him being the son of a movie director,
Yep.
who happened to be one of my favorites. I know now you're not supposed to like her, but Mira Nair is very well known movie director.
Yep.
I was into it, and she made movies like I think
Mississippi Masala.
Masala,
Hmm.
Vanity Fair. She did with Reese
Hmm.
Witherspoon, Kama Sutra. Look it up; it's not what you think.
Hmm.
And you have someone who is the son of a storyteller,
Hmm.
but you also have somebody who you write nobody asked to run.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there was not like the Democratic Socialists didn't sit in a room and hatch him in a
Absolutely.
lab. The Democratic establishment didn't want him. Who came up with the idea for him to run?
He did. He manifested it. And I think that's an important kind of first step in terms of understanding him. And I think it's really, to your point, speaks to someone who kind of has a unique life to give him the confidence to see himself in that situation.
But in the
You know,
post Obama era, it makes sense, which is, do I really have to wait in line?
do you
Like that
really have to?
that
Yes,
wait in line business
yes,
has been very shaken as a Democratic pillar.
absolutely. And you're also talking to someone who has existed outside of Democrats for a longer time. So, as I think Democrats are waking up to a moment now where they're seeing a disconnect between working class base and trying to thinking about how they update policy and platform and message to match that. Zohran Mamdani is someone who's been canvassing in working class neighborhoods of New York for the last 7 years, telling them that Democrats were out of touch, right? So it's not a new language that he had to find. He basically saw a new type of ceiling with beliefs he's long had. So when I'm talking to him, he kind of understood that his pro-Palestinian advocacy would be controversial in his political career until that has a big shift in terms of public sentiment over the last couple of years, right? And so he starts his political career like Muslim Democratic Club in New York, Democratic Socialists of America. And those things, I think, represent rising tides in the New York electorate, and I would say in the country generally.
I was about to say, I was reading some Gallup polling, I think maybe a month ago, that was talking about the sort of diminished faith in capitalism that Gen Z has, but how this is also very much reflected in the Democratic leaning electorate, which has become less, and I'm just going to use the term less hostile rather than pro to something like socialism.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I wouldn't say pro DSA, but I think the fear of DSA is definitely not the same. And also, I think DSA has matured in ways that I, try to lay out in the story, and I don't think it's been appreciated nationally. They were quite nervous about stepping into citywide races. They thought that did not have they thought a kind of electoral embarrassment would hurt them reputationally.
This is the Democratic Socialists.
The Democratic Socialists.
So they're like, we don't want to be seen as wingnuts.
What Zoran, I think, is good at understanding is his distinctness from typical DSA. So he is someone who, half the time is organizing in socialist Bernie language, but also he knows the kind of Arab and Muslim community. I call him like someone who's used to the aunties, and I think that and I think that's not universally true of all millennial socialists.
Of the Bernie Bros? No?
Yeah.
That was not the brand?
But
this is another good, see, again, so many threads. So we pulled two already. Social media, right? He understood. Number 2, you don't wait in line. But number 3, finding your distinct lane in a kind of confusing landscape of democratic ideologies and wings and parties. Because for the longest time, I feel like democratic socialism was seen as it's like the Green Party or something. There's some people out there, maybe they're left over from the 70s, who believe in A, B, and C. And then there's Bernie Sanders.
Right.
And the Bernie Bros, and that might have a horseshoe politic effect, and maybe some of them might even like Trump. Like we were saying some crazy things, political reporters, in the last 10 years. But it means we've arrived in this place where somebody could somehow find a distinctive lane as a democratic socialist, and that the voter would be able to be with them on that distinction.
Yeah, and I think that really the failures of democratic establishment, in my opinion, have opened up this space.
Ooh,
right?
Say more.
I think that Zoran's authenticity is a counterexample to the perceived inauthenticity that was happening at a national level. That he is seen as trustworthy, particularly in my opinion, because of advocacy around Gaza. I think particularly because of his willingness to kind of own populist against real estate companies type of lane. And I'm saying that's a lane that's been opened up because the Cuomos of the world, right, have been working with those folks hand in glove.
Yeah, but what about the Tim Waltzes? I mean, there were people who were authentic, or at least authentically deemed authentic.
I'm not saying that they don't exist in the National Party.
Yeah.
I'm really saying that the National Party has had a brand collapse under Biden. 100%.
Okay.
Like, this isn't going to matter when we're talking about like the New Jersey race or the Virginia governor's race, because those things are done with the prospect of beating a Republican on the other side. I think this matters within Democratic context in New York City. I think this is going to matter in the presidential primary when it comes to 2027. But within Democrats' own in-group, the center has collapsed in terms of trust.
So you talked about the idea that the DSA, Democratic Socialists, at least the local chapters, they were a little bit nervous about him. But it brings me back to the point that he's not the first DSA candidate, right? Like someone to get that endorsement.
Yeah.
And how, or in what ways is he not different from Bernie Sanders or AOC or the people traditionally backed by Democratic Socialists?
Well, I would say if you just use Sanders and Ocasio-Cortez as examples, Zoran Mamdani is much more of a rank-and-file DSA member. He was part of the org. He's a part of the endorsement process. He helped shape their electoral strategy. They're used to kind of having candidates more like AOC who embrace progressive politics and then join up with DSA basically for the purposes of their run. He's a DSA baby. That's a little different than I think other folks. I think it's part of the reason some of his values are expressed more clearly. Like, he will not budge on billionaires should not exist. That's a core belief of his. And so I think it's been the relationship with DSA it will be interesting going forward, because in some ways they have more sense of ownership around him. They have more sense of expectation around him. But at the same time, the mayoral role, and I think Zoran knows this, he expressed it to me, does not reward purity ideologically. It's a horrible role for that. If you want to maintain your beliefs and not change, you should be in Congress. So I'm saying, like, they love
I can tell
about
you've
you.
left the Times. Just jokes left and right now. All right,
I'm
so
like,
then
join the Senate if you want to do nothing.
exactly. Here's another question then. Here's another question. The Mamdani that won the New York City primary, Democratic primary this summer, is not the same one who's campaigning now. What are the issues? Just give us two where he has made either a compromise or found a way to talk to the voter about.
The biggest one is policing. That's the biggest one.
Policing. Okay. Yeah. So coming off of, meaning was he a defund the police advocate? Okay.
He was. And he has not only 180'd, he has apologized. He has apologized direct to camera on Fox News. He's apologized privately to rank and file officers. He has, in interviews with me and elsewhere, pretty much signaled he's willing to keep on NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch.
Is he like, I was just wrong, they're amazing, or there's a different way to do policing? Like, does he have a way of spinning it?
He literally says, I got caught up in the heat of a moment and misunderstood the severity of the issue. And he will own that he was incorrect. And so I think the number one shift is policing. And I think it's important to know, like, to what I'm saying about mayors, like, police kind of have veto power on mayors. And the New York City example is Bill de Blasio. Like, he basically never recovers reputationally from police turning their backs on him. And so it seems pretty clear that Mamdani proactively was trying to heal that relationship before he gets into office. And folks around him say that's necessary, not just because police are core to kind of the day-to-day functioning with city, but because Donald Trump might be imposing the National Guard. Like, he might need police in a way to side
Donald
with
Trump made gains in New York and New Jersey and other areas, specifically around law and order, voters, and crime as an issue.
Right. So he is presented with polling at the beginning of the race that says public safety is the number one concern. He says, no, we got to make this about affordability. But they understand that public safety is a barrier for them, and that people's concerns about public safety rise, everything is going to collapse. And so what I'm saying is they stepped away from it. And so what I think where he has landed, I imagine will be where Democrats land. Like, they're not going back to defund, not even the left. And so I think that we can see this as kind of an answer to where Democrats have landed on, like, issues like public safety. It'll be interesting to see how they talk about it, though. And I think Zoran's a good example of, like, if defund doesn't have an electoral benefit for him, we can pretty much assume it's dead.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, interesting. So I asked you about how he's a different candidate than he was when he won the primary. And I think there's no way we can talk about this without talking about how he has dealt not just with the war in Gaza, but with the Jewish community of New York. And this is obviously important because the student protests at Columbia and on college campuses generally completely wrecked democratic politics on Israel.
Yeah.
Like every schism has been laid bare.
Yeah.
And then in comes a democratic socialist brown candidate.
Muslim.
Yeah, who's Muslim. And so what did he try to do, and who helped him do it?
This is the core issue to his political activation. The idea that Israel and Palestine is how Zoran Mamdani came to politics is true. He says this. In high school, he is arguing with classmates on Facebook about Palestine. And he talks about how he would define himself as a progressive and started getting upset with Democrats because he didn't believe they were applying their progressive values there. So he starts Students for Justice in Palestine in college. So I'm saying, like, it is the through line.
This is not a heat of the moment.
It's not a heat of the moment.
Situation.
It is who he is.
Yeah.
And so I think that's step one. Step two is, like, when he gets to office, I think particularly in the last couple years, he was part of Uncommitted. pushing back against Biden and saying that there should be a primary challenger. He was one of the key connectors when they were pushing to get a Palestinian speaker at the DNC. And so, like, all of
Which they
those are,
did not
which they did
get.
not.
He is part of the movement that some people would look at and say, maybe Biden would have done better in here and there if you didn't have this
Yes.
activist left pushing the administration on Gaza.
Yeah. And then when he starts running, his advocacy becomes a reason for him to break through the field, right? There were so many progressive and left candidates who were supposed to be ahead of him in this race, right? But what they were not doing was centering Palestinian advocacy. And so it becomes a key connector. And I think this is important for folks to get. Like, he raises initial money because of that, right? Like, it drives his ability to go on shows or connect with, like, even some celebrities who are speaking out come to him because of that.
The flip side is, there on Jake Tapper the other day, there was a rabbi who, gave his message to his congregation of like, you should not vote for Mamdani.
He's not going to win a certain set of folks. I'm saying, and I
Okay.
think they've conceded that. But Zohran Mamdani is very likely to win more Jewish votes than Andrew Cuomo. Very much more likely.
So that leaves us with our final two issues. Andrew Cuomo, in a lot of ways, represents the past fights of the Democratic Party, right?
For sure.
Like holding on to, a white ethnic voter population, right? A base that is going to turn out and support you with messages that you think are going to win them over. Even their fight culturally over the Me Too movement, right? Going from any infraction is disqualifying to, I guess you're running again, right? Yep. So is Mamdani leading or is Cuomo losing? And in a way, you could have said the same thing with Eric Adams, right? Like, are we looking at someone on the ascent, or are these figures so diminished they never should have been in the race?
I think it's an important point. Like, I think Zohran has unique qualities that are helping his ascent, but if you set those to the side, there is independent issues. But Cuomo really had, he had pitched the inevitability just beyond like name recognition and stuff. People really thought that old delivery form of politics still worked. He had the union endorsements, right? He had your traditional electeds who were supposed to be turnout machines, right? They just don't work in the same way anymore. And so I think that that's a bigger shift than even Cuomo's own individual failures as a candidate. Like, the version of politics that is top down is not producing, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm saying that's what Biden was betting on too, that he can just like kind of impose those old rules. And that coalition of everything, older Black folks, of homeowners, of kind of moderate, like that kind of moderate coalition has its own is fraying. And I think it's an interesting thing when we think about what's going to happen in the presidential primary coming forward, because I think a lot of people are just very used to being able to cobble together a kind of Biden-esque group. But I think the mayor's race really, in my opinion, should be a takeaway from them, is like they're not delivering the votes. And so if you can cross the barrier that Mamdani did in terms of engaging people on the mass politics level, they're paper tigers, know? And so like, I think that is what a lot of the kind of populist lane is feeling right now, is that the party's kind of ripe for the taking. And so like, I think that's going to be a theme that we see over the next year or so. It's playing out in Maine. It's playing out we're seeing these like all over the place, because the feeling is that, we don't have to be as scared maybe as we were.
One of the things that I think we all learned from Kamala Harris and her loss is that clicks are not votes.
Yep.
That you can have a surge of online interest that does not translate in the places you need it to. And Mamdani was named by Wired as the internet's mayor. So tell me what you think is the difference between the like online algorithmically reinforced energy around him and like coconuts.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. Both is where you work, right? Is where online is not irrelevant, but as we know, it's not the whole thing either. And so he had the intention about social, particularly to drive interest, to drive money, all those things. I said this as someone who lives in kind of Mamdani capital of the world. Like I live in North Brooklyn, I live in Bushwick. Like
Oh, where everyone is Mamdani pilled,
I'm
I
saying,
think
like
would be the word.
he puts up North Korea numbers there. But the important thing is not that it's young leftists. The important thing is that my neighbors love him. The important thing is like like the New York City coalition of immigrants, distant from politics, love him. And so that's what I tell people is the distinction between Brat Summer and some of this stuff
Yeah.
is like
And
that
Mamdani Fall.
yeah, I'm like, that stuff was only among the stands.
Yeah.
That was only the stands. And so I'm saying that was never a kind of organic thing that was also translating to people who don't follow day to day. The thing that has been most impressive about the coalition is it is the politically interested and uninterested. It is illusion and disillusion.
Is that because he does what Trump does, meaning I'm going to the podcast.
For sure.
I'm
I think that
sitting for
matters.
3 hours. I'm also in the memes.
Yes.
I'm also able
Yes.
to engage with people in what I call the modern retail
Absolutely.
politics currency, which is authenticity.
Yeah, I think that's super important. Donald Trump is another person who is very good at illusion and disillusion, like and getting them to vote. And so I'm like, you can ignore that or not, but like that is the sauce. You know, I'm at a Zoran rally and he goes, we're going to freeze and the crowd goes red. We're going to make buses free and then make childcare universal. I'm like, I don't get that kind of call of response about politicians and their policy unless it's build the wall, usually. You know, and so I'm saying,
I see what
that level of connectivity from person to policy is unique. You know, what issue could Kamala Harris yell out and people would respond back? You know,
maybe a Beyonce lyric.
Yeah. I'm not saying it wouldn't have been like. And so when I'm there, I'm like, oh, it's actually that's what movement is. You know,
but it's interesting what you're saying because you're right. It is replicable, meaning many other Republican candidates could go to their events and yell "build the," and people would say "wall."
Yeah, for sure.
And you're saying that it may not be free buses, but you think there's some version of that evocative,
and also tangibly matters, like an immediate impact. He says this to me clearly. He's like, we're so, I thought it was a good quote. I don't even know if I put it in the piece, but he's talking about like, he's so used to in Albany, you pass something and then you go message to people and you tell them why they matter.
Right. Because they can't feel it.
Right. He's saying you pass the right type of policy. You don't do that pitching. They already feel the change in their lives. And so I'm saying that is definitely a national policy that can have those similar types of impact. The question is, do Democrats want to engage in that kind of direct to consumer style politics?
Will there actually be tangible lessons for Democrats out of this race, given that, and maybe because I'm from Boston, it's New York. Like, I just think sometimes there are things that are specific to New York. It's not really a bellwether, or else we would have had a President Bloomberg.
Yeah, I mean, and here's what I say to that kind of question is like, Democrats have collapsed in cities, and that messed them up in last November. Like,
cities. We're not talking rural areas. We're like, you lost the people who
they
traditionally...
lost blue areas. Yeah. They had huge... I mean, the reason Donald Trump is a popular vote winner is about New York, is about Chicago, is about Los Angeles, right? For sure. And so I don't think it doesn't matter, because I think that these cities and Democrats' relationship to their own voters there is a core part of their electoral problem and their brand problem. Like, I think they are not working for most people, right? And I think most people... relationship to Democrats comes from their city, and they're largely broken. I think that's fair to say. And so I think that like that to me is a reason why it matters. The second thing I think is it makes important, and this is why I say it's about the primary and not the midterms, is like, I think the people who are trying to extrapolate this to midterm races, that's not how they work. Midterms are about the competitive nature. It's a referendum on person in power. It's also going to be,
it's also the purity test, though. And I mean,
100%.
I think that's why people are asking this question, because if midterms are where you have the base say, this is what we want, it's actually kind of tricky understanding who should be your long-term person, path, and approach.
I'm saying my experience with midterms is they're localized races. What I think what Mamdani's impact will be is when Democrats are having a national conversation about who they want to be, which is, in my opinion, a presidential primary and not a midterms race.
Which
a
is,
midterms race,
let's call it the lost primary.
Yeah, I'm like, the midterms races will be about beating the Republican on the other side. They will be about electability. So people make choices kind of in that framework. The open question, particularly when it comes to who Democrats want to be in their relationship to Israel, who Democrats want to be in terms of deportations and immigration, who like all of those kind
and
of
the economy.
on the economy.
Do you care about zoning or
like,
free buses?
100%.
Like, it's
I'm saying all of those. It's actually a wild open space.
Yeah,
and I don't think any of that is really going to get dug into until 2027. And so I think the Zoran question of it all, how much is advocating for Palestinians a litmus test for Democrats at this point? Because Gallup polling tells us like it's an 80-20 issue at this point. And so I'm like, that would tell me that come primary time, it's going to be very difficult to get around that.
Yeah.
You know? And so I think
and
that
very
is going to be
difficult to then turn to those same base voters and say, hold that thought, because we really think we should go in a different direction for the general, when they might look at an election cycle past and say, that doesn't work.
They don't want to do that. And so I actually just think there's been a fundamental change in the Dem electorate. I don't think we know exactly where that goes. So they're forced to have that conversation out loud and in public. And
at the ballot box.
And then, yeah, to me, I'm like, it's 2019 all over again. We're going to get that like cluster, messy 20 candidates. And I'm thinking that one didn't settle those questions, though, because the obsession was about beating Trump. And that electability concern pointed to Joe Biden. But they never answered who they were on immigration. They never answered who they were on economy. Like, and I think they've just punted all of those things until they're going to be forced to answer it next time around.
Well, Ested, it's been a joy watching your rise. It's been a joy watching you as a reporter come up. Congratulations on your new gig.
Thank you. I'm excited.
You are? Oh, good. Because the media is collapsing around us like a scene in Inception. So I'm glad someone's happy.
No, I appreciate it. And love being on.